Thank you, Kenneth. You know, I know you said you weren't a technical guy and that you don't come from a technical background, but I think it would be safe to say you're one of the most analytical people I've ever come across, and I found a number of the different perspectives you presented to be quite fascinating. So I do thank you for that, as I'm sure we all do. Please join me in thanking Dr. Gears for his presentation. Our next speaker hails from the great city of New York. I think maybe the second greatest city in the world, right? Yosef Lehrman, Director, Information Security Section, Information Technology Bureau, New York City Police Department. Director Yosef Lehrman oversees the Information Security Section of the New York City Police Department's Information Technology Bureau. In this capacity, he is responsible for the preservation of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of NYPD information systems by detecting and responding to network intrusions or other unauthorized actions that would compromise or cripple NYPD information systems and networks. He also acts as an advisor to the Deputy Commissioner of Information Technology, providing security audit and review, product evaluations, and policy recommendations, and is the principal subject matter expert for the investigation of computer security incidents that affect the NYPD. Director Lehrman has an MS in Internet Technology from Pace University and holds several industry standard certifications. Please join me in welcoming Yosef to the stage.
Okay, thank you. So, as everyone's aware, the New York City Police Department is the largest municipal police department in the United States. We have approximately 50,000 personnel overall. New York City is a major financial and geopolitical nerve center of the world, with over 8 million people to protect and serve. With so many people, such a large population, it's vital that we have computer systems that are available when we need them, that we have data that we can trust to make sound tactical decisions, and of course, we prevent unauthorized individuals from accessing that data. Today, I'd like to share with you some thoughts on cyberterrorism, what it is, what it isn't, how we can detect it, and most importantly, how we can defend ourselves against it. So, one of the major sources of frustration, and probably the only point of agreement among academics, politicians, and security professionals, is the lack of a clear and unanimously accepted definition of the term terrorism, which has consequentially had a negative impact on attempts to create a common terminology for cyberterrorism. Without the ability to appropriately define terrorism, we cannot begin to have a clear and coherent discussion of what the cyber version of terrorism is, which has led to the term being applied to a wide variety of cyber threats and attacks. If we begin with the assumption that cyberterrorism is the employment of terrorism in cyberspace, then it follows that in order to be considered an act of cyberterrorism, number one, the action must be sufficiently destructive or disruptive to generate fear comparable to physical acts of terror. Number two, the perpetrator or perpetrators of the action must not be nation-state actors. Actions by a nation-state would most likely fall into the category of cyber war and not cyber terror. And number three, the intended goals must be political or social in nature. The definition set forth by Kenneth Himma in his 2007 book, Internet Security, Hacking, Counter-Hacking, and Society, meets all these criteria. By this definition, cyberterrorism is highly damaging computer-based attacks or threats of attack by non-state actors against information systems when conducted to intimidate or coerce governments or societies in pursuit of goals that are political or social. Under this definition, actions taken by non-state actors to date would most likely not be considered cyberterrorism. The most destructive or disruptive attacks have not had political or social goals. The goals have typically been economic. The attacks with political or social goals have generally not been intimidating. They've generally been simple web defacements, Twitter compromises, things of that nature that have been disruptive, annoying, but have not had much impact. Now, this doesn't mean to imply that cyberterrorism is not an area of concern. On the contrary, we are seeing terrorist groups that are becoming quite skilled at using cyberspace to facilitate their operation in many ways. A number of terrorist groups have advocated conducting cyber attacks. Some have even engaged in some light hacking. Additionally, new hacking groups have emerged which, while allegedly are not affiliated with terrorist organizations, there are definitely some unofficial connections between them. So the available evidence to date does not support an imminent threat of cyber terrorism. We have seen some nation-state actors that appear to have taken an interest in cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. However, there have been few indications that that terrorist groups that are backed by these nation-states have taken up this same interest. Terrorist groups not affiliated with nation-states have also apparently not devoted much discussion to this idea, at least as compared with discussion and research on traditional attacks. One possibility that has been raised in the media as well is the concept of cyber terrorism being used in conjunction with a physical attack, perhaps as a means of amplifying the effect of physical attack by either impeding emergency response to the incident and or to increase fear. However, traditionally, terrorists have not integrated multiple modes of attack. Even in attacks that have involved multiple coordinated attacks, such as the recent bombing in Brussels, Belgium, what you've seen is multiple occurrences of the same mechanism of attack and less multiple modes of attack within a single incident. It is unlikely that terrorists would suddenly succeed with an attack requiring coordination across the cyber and physical domains without training, discussion, and planning, actions that would hopefully be detected by global intelligence agencies. Discussions around online training in cyber attack methodology and techniques have tended to skew more towards ensuring operational security for terror group members and less towards actual attacks of consequence. As an example, media publications released by the Islamic State typically offer concrete operational guidance. The most recent issue of Dar al-Islam, which is the French language magazine of the Islamic State, contained a 14-page technical section. This was not a hacker's manual on how to launch successful attacks. However, it did not provide detailed guidance on how to attack high-value critical infrastructure. Rather, the section was dedicated to ways in which one may operate online anonymously. Another illustrative example is the video that was released by Al-Qaeda in June of 2011. The video, which is posted on memory, it's called Al-Qaeda on E-Jihad, the internet, shows imagery of high-level attacks. You see people working with computers, doing all sorts of very technical things. There's books about hacking in the background. But the video advocates actually low-level denial-of-service attacks, harnessing computers to target another website and make that website unavailable from the internet. Again, annoying, yes. Disruptive, yes. Websites of large corporations, such as the ones advocated in the video, CNN, Yahoo, Amazon, have typically proven to be very resilient to this sort of attack, and while I don't minimize the economic damage that would result from taking these sites offline, I don't think it would rise to the level of cyber terrorism, at least based on what we've discussed, based on the definition that we've put forth until now. Of greater concern than a terrorist group developing the capability to launch a successful terrorist attack is that of terrorist organizations forming an alliance with hacker groups. There are thousands of hacking groups worldwide, and in any moment, a group can align themselves with terrorists, adding to the skill base that can then be applied to cyber terrorism. The idea of terrorist organizations aligning themselves with traditional criminal elements is not unprecedented. There are many documented cases of, for example, smuggling or other criminal activity that has been used in support of terrorism. While the vast majority of hackers would not support terrorism directly, and certainly most likely not condone loss of life, nevertheless, it is likely that at least some of them would hack in support of the same objectives. We've seen this with Anonymous, for example, where Anonymous Op Israel actually supports the same stated objectives as many terrorist organizations, and yet Anonymous has an Op ISIS operation which is allegedly against terrorism. There have also been numerous examples of terrorist organizations utilizing the internet to distribute documents, video, and/or audio recordings to recruit and spread well-known propaganda. There have also been examples of terrorist sympathizers using the internet to compromise information, to steal information that can then be used to heighten people's sense of fear, distributing public information, making personally identifiable information public. The most significant threat, though, stems from lone wolf-style actors with specialized knowledge and cyber capabilities. These actors could be selected from known terrorist recruits or, more concerningly, radicalized from the general population. Of particular interest is the case of Ali Salah Kala al-Mari, a Qatari citizen, who was arrested shortly after 9/11 in the United States and allegedly, at least in the media, has been linked to an objective of conducting cyber attacks on US banks. Allegedly, this individual was placed into the United States by Al-Qaeda for the sole purpose of conducting cyber attacks on US banks. He was actually arrested in 2001. He was, after a lot of legal wrangling, he eventually was sentenced to time served and was released. He's now back in Qatar, presumably. However, what makes his case particularly concerning is that he was sent to the United States for the sole purpose of going to graduate school to gain a degree in computer science and then use that knowledge against the United States. If this is something that is a trend that's going to be maintained, this poses a very, very serious problem to the national security of not only the United States, but of any country, where you have people who have learnt essentially all the techniques and tools and tricks of how to hack and now can use them against the critical infrastructure of that country themselves. So, fortunately, ultimately, in regards to securing our networks, the same basic principles apply, irrespective of origin, methodology, or ideology of the attacker. To start with, I'm going to say something that everybody knows and has heard time and time again. Appropriate system hygiene is vital. According to the Center for Internet Security, if an inventory of authorized devices and software is maintained, secure configurations for all devices appropriately developed and managed, continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation conducted, and administrative privileges actively managed and controlled, approximately 80% of attacks could be prevented. Obviously, there are other steps that can be implemented to prevent intrusions from occurring or mitigate the impacts of those intrusions. For example, application whitelisting and network segmentation. Taken together, if properly implemented, we can probably prevent 90 or maybe more % of attacks. However, despite the best of efforts of security professionals, it is impossible to completely prevent attacks. As such, organizations must develop a plan to address the inevitable cyber attacks before they occur. This plan will be most effective when developed by a working group headed by a strong leader and made up of a cross-functional collection of senior managers. The objective would be to map out a risk profile for the organization and identify possible attack methodologies, targets, vulnerabilities, and impacts. It is important not to get stuck trying to come up with detailed estimates of damage, an estimate that most likely won't be highly accurate in the event of a real-world incident in any case. Instead, rough estimates are acceptable, just enough to provide a sense of scale and the type of potential harm which should then be used to develop a risk mitigation strategy. When creating the working group to develop the organizational risk profile, there's often a struggle to determine where within the organization the group should fall. It is absolutely critical that the group reside within the technology area of the organization. Cyber is often considered within the context of a variety of other fields: counterterrorism, espionage, crime, and so on. However, cyber does not lend itself effectively to such stovepiping. The fact is that cyber often bleeds between these disciplines as well as others. Cyber is computers, it is a technical discipline, and oddly enough, for some reason which I have not yet been able to figure out, this particular fact is often overlooked. On the slide you see the OODA loop. An OODA loop is a theory developed by US military strategist, Air Force Colonel John Richard Boyd. And the key concept is that the loop represents the decision cycle, or the process by which an entity reacts to an event. The theory posits that the key to victory is to be able to create situations wherein one can make appropriate decisions more quickly than the adversary. In other words, to close or shrink the OODA loop. In the cyber arena, the same tools, tactics, and procedures can be used offensively or defensively. Most organizations have no problem placing these defensive tools, tactics, and procedures in the technology group. Therefore, it would make sense to have the people who are handling these tools, tactics, and procedures on the defensive side handle them on the offensive level as well. When an organization chooses to break this apart and situate their intelligence, their observe and orient areas within the intelligence component, the decide within the executive component, and the act within the technical component, and not have them combined together, not having them working together, what they've effectively done is enlarge their OODA loop and essentially all but ensured that the adversary will be successful. I'm not advocating that intelligence be disbanded. I'm not advocating that we get rid of everybody except technical people. My key point is that everyone needs to work together, not only in the same organization, but ideally in the same room, in the same group. To summarize, I want to end off on a bit of an optimistic note. The threat of cyberterrorism is not as high as you might think by reading some news articles, but it is not non-existent and probably will grow. In the event that terrorist groups begin to move towards conducting operations in cyberspace, there are some indicators that we should see, listed here in order of decreasing significance. The execution of cyber attacks, and that means all sorts of computer network attack, actions taken to disrupt, deny, degrade, or destroy information, or the information systems that information resides within. That is not specifically limited to cyberterrorism. Number two would be acquisition and distribution of cyber weapons, research and development in cyber weapons, and training in the use of cyber weapons. Number three would be discussions about declarations of intent to perform and or calls for performing cyber attacks. Number four would be pursuit of formal education in information technology. And number five would be incorporating general use of the internet for communications and distribution of news and propaganda. The good news is that by appropriately framing the problem and appropriately structuring our organizations, we are in an excellent position to successfully meet and defeat this threat. Thank you.